On Thursday, people in Britain are faced with a huge decision that could have implications well beyond its borders. Voters will decide in a referendum whether the country should remain a member of the European Union or leave it, a process frequently referred to as Brexit. And with just days to go before the vote, many in the UK are also wondering if last week's murder of a British Member of Parliament may impact the outcome. We begin with CCTV correspondent Jack Barton, who joins us from London. And Jack, let's talk first about the murder of Jo Cox, that British Member of Parliament. She was campaigning for Britain to remain in the European Union. She was murdered. Is her murder expected to have much impact on how people vote in this referendum?
Well, it already has had an impact. We saw within hours of that murder by a man who, judging by the comments he made at the crime scene, clearly wanted Britain to exit the bloc. Within hours, we saw two major newspaper polls showing that for the first time in a week, a majority of Britons wish to remain within the EU. But the biggest impact this murder has really had is in the mood of the campaigning. It was suspended for a couple of days, but now that it is on the road again, we've seen it is much calmer. There is much less hysteria. We've seen it more anchored in facts than some of the fiery words and ideas that have been thrown out there over the past few weeks. And that has really been welcomed by politicians, but especially by the general public. And we've seen both sides united against some of the fierier rhetoric, like a campaign poster that came out hours before that murder, which showed a row of asylum seekers walking through a field with breaking point above it. Even people who wish to exit have railed against that poster, and one former parliamentarian said it was her breaking point. She decided to switch sides and go with the Remain camp, saying it was just a case of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, xenophobic racism. And
Jack, what are the other main arguments being offered by both sides of this issue in the closing days of this campaign?
For the exit camp, it really is about migration, especially with the refugee crisis in Europe. It's about controlling Britain's borders, even though Britain is not part of the passport-free zone in Europe and actually has an opt-out in terms of accepting refugees. It's nonetheless a big concern here. Many people just believe too many EU citizens are coming to Britain for economic reasons, and they want to opt out of the EU purely for that reason. Even if they accept, there will be short-term economic damage. For those who want to remain, it's really about the economy, particularly since the foundation of the economy here is finance. And big countries like China, the United States, use the United Kingdom as a gateway into Europe. So those are the two big issues. It's about the economy for those who wish to remain. It's about migration for those who believe it's time Britain left the EU.
And Jack, how close is it? What are the polls indicating right now?
It's still very close. The polls are showing there is still a majority, again, for those who wish to remain. We've seen the pound sterling rising. We've seen the stock exchange, the FTSE 100 rising, because the finance centre, again, is very much hoping it's going to be a case of remain. But perhaps more importantly, the bookmakers, those who make bets on such things, have for weeks predicted a remain. And they have tended to be far more accurate than the polls, particularly when it came to the last election, when the polls said David Cameron would lose. The bookmakers said he'd come back with a majority. So they're giving confidence to the markets and those who wish to remain.
All right, Jack, thanks. That's CCTV's Jack Barton reporting from London. And now for perspectives from both sides of the Brexit debate. Joining us from London is John Petley. He supports the UK leaving Europe and is the operations manager for the Campaign for an Independent Britain. Joining us from Manchester is Mohammed Shafiq. He wants the UK to remain in Europe, and he's chief executive of the Ramadan Foundation. Welcome to both of you to the show. John, let me start with you. What is your main argument for wanting Britain to leave the European Union?
I want to see us put right a great wrong. We were led into the European Union really by deceit. The plan right from the start was that the British people were going to be deceived into supporting a political project designed to hollow out our national democratic institutions that was going to be disguised as an economic project. You talk to people even now who voted in the 1975 referendum, and the number of them that say, I thought we were joining a common market. I thought this was about trade. Well, that's what we were told, but it's always been the plan to create this political entity called the European Union. And to me, it's a sense of injustice. I feel very annoyed that we were ever conned into the first place, and I feel very excited too that we could be within a few days of righting this historic wrong.
Mohammed, what do you make of that this was supposed to be a trade relationship with Europe? It's evolved into a political relationship, and many in Britain right now, those who want to leave Europe, feel that Britain has surrendered some of its sovereignty to Europe.
Well, let's just take the issue about the political union, a closer political union. We're not part of the euro. We've got a veto about other states that may want to join the European Union. And David Cameron has been very clear in this negotiation that he's got an opt-out from further integration within the European Union. So we've got a special relationship within the Union. And for all its weak points, and yes, there are areas where we can encourage more reform and more democracy, but actually we're stronger in Europe. If you look on the issues of trade, you look at economy, look at security, 28 countries working together is far more better than 21 country on its own. And what the Brexiteers want to go back to is a 1950s Great Britain relationship with the European community. And I don't think that's what we are heading towards. We live in a globalised world where you can travel from one part of the world to the other part of the world. And so we've got to be outward looking. Britain is a great country with great opportunities and great prospects, and that is at risk if we don't vote to stay in the European Union on Thursday.
OK, John, let's talk about that special status that the Prime Minister David Cameron is looking for with Europe. He made something of an impassioned plea in a speech to the British Parliament. Let's listen to some of what he had to say.
When you've got the leader of the Labour Party, and indeed almost all of the Labour Party, a Conservative government, the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, the official Ulster Unionists and the Scottish National Party all saying we have huge disagreements, but on this vital issue for the future of our country, the best option for Britain is to vote to remain in a reformed European Union, that really says something.
So, John, what the Prime Minister is saying here is that if Europe implements some kind of reforms, gives us some kind of special status, that will be acceptable to us. We can stay in Europe, reap the benefits of being in the European Union and not surrender the kind of political rights that you were talking about.
Well, first of all, I have very grave doubts as to how watertight David Cameron's deal actually is. But secondly, let's consider what wasn't up for grabs. We've already surrendered control of our fishing. We've already surrendered control of our agriculture. We're still going to be under the thumb of the European Court of Justice. And what's more, we're going to be basically shouting from the sidelines. The two big projects that the European Union has really pushed has been the Schengen borderless zone and the euro. We're going to be out of both of those, and yet that's going to be the focus of the way the EU is going to move. I would say it's much, much better for us, rather than being stuck on the sidelines, to say, well, let's be friends. We still want to be part of, trading with Europe. But let's go back to what we had. There is certainly a formula that would work, that would get us out, that would just have us trading only with the European Union, still being friends, but not part of a political project for ever closer union that we've never wanted to be part of, which I think, for all Mr. Cameron's guarantees, we're still going to be really trailing along in the wake of. I don't see it as being a really permanent break on the integration process.
OK, Mohammed, what do you make of those arguments?
Well, we can't argue, as John is arguing, that, there is a mad conspiracy for an ever closer political union, and then say in the same breath that we're not part of the Schengen Agreement, we're not part of the euro, and that's a special status that we have within the European Union. And so I actually think on the issue of trade, if you look at all our international friends, from the United States to China to Canada and other parts of the world, every single of our friends is saying Britain is stronger in the international community because of our status within the European Union. And if you look at on the issue of trade, trade agreements take 7 to 10 years. The uncertainty of these last few weeks, since the polls have shown Britain heading towards a Brexit, demonstrate to you whether we've seen a run in the pound and we've seen it affect shares in the FTSE 100. And so our argument is, if this is what is happening just on a mere example of an opinion poll, what will happen if we vote on Thursday to leave the European Union? I think there will be an impact on the jobs, there'll be on the economy, on people's livelihoods, and I think Britain's future and safety as a country is at risk if we vote to leave.
Mohammed, one other issue that I want to talk about, and we hear a lot about this, and that is the issue of immigration. a lot of people who want to leave Europe feel that Britain's immigration doors have been left open for people to come into a country that can't manage this influx.
Yeah, look, I mean, we need to have an honest and open debate about immigration. And yes, it's right that any country has, a controlled immigration. But, we are part of the European Union, and when there is free movement of people, there are millions of our own citizens that travel and work in the European Union, and vice versa. There are people that come into this country. As part of his renegotiation, the Prime Minister has got restrictions on welfare payments. But I think this is a myth by the Brexiteers who pander to the far right and racism by suggesting that 75 million Turks want to come into this country, or that we've been swamped by migrants across Europe. And I think that sort of dangerous language that has led to polarisation in our society, which we saw last week so tragically with the brutal killing of a Member of Parliament here in the UK, Joe Cox. So let's have a debate about immigration. Let's base it on facts. And let's, leave the rhetoric and the racism that we've seen from the likes of Nigel Farage and others at home and really debate the issues.
OK, John, what are your thoughts on the immigration part of this debate? Because it seems to be an issue that resonates very strongly with those who want to leave Europe.
I wish it hadn't been given the profile that it had. I'll tell you why I say that. Because for people for whom immigration is the main issue, their votes, I would say, have been in the bag for a very long time. To me, it's a case of how do we deal with the people who are concerned with the EU but who have other concerns. That's really where I would have wanted to put the focus of the debate. We in the Campaign for Independent Britain have not been making a big thing about immigration. But I can say a couple of things as far as immigration goes. It is quite a legitimate concern for a number of reasons. We've had immigration on an almost unprecedented scale, certainly since 2004. There are people who feel that their jobs have been affected because, say, people come in from another country who've been prepared to undercut to work for a lower rate than they're being paid. That is a concern. There's also a feeling that where large numbers of them have arrived, and this is particularly so in, for instance, parts of East Anglia, it's almost like the whole character of certain small towns and villages have been changed by a very large number of influx of people in a very short space of time. I can fully sympathise why people do feel concerned. What I would say is that I don't see a vote to leave the EU on this coming week as a panacea for all the concerns that people feel about immigration. I would say rather that it would give us a lot more levers to try and deal with what is always going to be a very difficult situation.
Right, Mohammed, you mentioned Nigel Farage. He's the leader of the British UK Independence Party, or UKIP as it's known. He's a strong advocate for Britain leaving the European Union. Let's listen to some of what he had to say about this.
There is nothing in this that is about being on the left or being on the right. It's about, do you want your country back? Do you want control of your borders, of your life, of your laws, of your courts? And to me, that is a positive, upbeat, sensible argument. Most people around the world want to control their own destiny. We cannot do so as members of this union.
There we have Nigel Farage telling us, Mohammed, that this is not about ideology. This is about British sovereignty. This is about taking control of your own affairs.
Well, he's spent the last few months just pandering to the far right and the inflammatory language that is being used by him. And I accept that John hasn't been involved in that. But that's the danger that we've had now. We've had an alarming amount of rhetoric and negativity. There are some people here in the UK who say that people like me and others who are on the Remain camp are any less patriotic. As if we're selling our country to the European Union. And I think it's that sort of language that puts people off. In the end, when people go into that polling station to vote, they will be voting, how does this affect me? How does it affect my job? How does it affect my pay pocket? And how does it affect my wages? And I think if people really reflect on that, there is certainty about staying in the European Union. We know what we will get is what we get now. But, Brexiteers haven't been able to tell us what will happen if we leave the European Union. There will be 2 years of renegotiation, so that's 2 years of uncertainty. There's a potential of a recession, and there's potential and impact on jobs on the economy. So, that's the reality of their campaign. And so I think in the end, on the whole, people will come back to the Remain campaign and we'll win on Thursday.
Right, John, let's talk about the economic impact, how it affects people's jobs, how it affects their pay packets, as Mohammed has pointed out. There is a concern, there is a worry that Brexit could hurt the British economy. The Bank of England has even warned that a Brexit could pose a global financial risk. It asks the question, how would the UK economy function if it was no longer a member of the EU? So would there be financial benefits for England if it leaves?
I think in the long term there would be. I wouldn't want to go along with some of the more optimistic forecasts saying that we'd have a bonanza the day we leave. I don't think that's true at all. The key to it is actually Mr. Cameron. If we have a recession, it's really basically up to him or not. He has been aware of a number of different exit strategies, and I'd be the first to admit it's been perhaps the weak link of our campaign that we haven't coalesced around one single exit strategy. Certainly speaking for myself, speaking for a number of campaigns, including quite a few individuals in my organisation, we believe that withdrawing from the EU is going to be a process. To get through that Brexit door, we need a safe option, and I have consistently advocated in the book I've written and in the various articles I post on the website that for our holding position to get us through the Brexit door is to do a 1973 in reverse, to rejoin the European Free Trade Association, EFTA, in other words, to take Norway as an off-the-cuff, proven template of how we can relate to the EU, trade with it, have full access to the single market, but without actually being part of a project for political union, which we don't really want to be part of. It's not a long-term answer, and going back to the immigration point, it certainly wouldn't satisfy some of the more fervent people who want to see immigration cut drastically. But it's given a choice between a secure transit economically and immigration, we have to take the economy as the main thing to consider.
Okay, Mohammed, I need a very quick response. The Norway model, wouldn't that work for Britain?
Well, if you want to be part of the single market and have access to the single market, one of the essential requirements is free movement of people. And free movement of goods is an essential requirement of that relationship. So the idea that if we leave the European Union, we'll get control of our borders and we'll be able to stop the migrants coming in from across Europe is just not true. If it was the Norway model or the Canada model or the Albanian model, I mean, the Brexiteers have been all over the place because they've not been able to articulate which model it is.
Right.
But I think, you know, if we leave, we'll still have control. Will we have control of our borders? And if we stay in the European Union, we'll be part of the single market. And I think that will happen if we leave as well.